Hello, Rubs. We're back with Three Loves of Dostoevsky. We are on the first section, part 4 of Maria, the First Love. Even though Dostoevsky bore no resemblance to Devushkin, his life too held nothing beside a dream of love. In White Nights, an autobiographical short novel written soon after Poor Folk and issued in 1848, he portrayed a young man who roams the streets of the capital and dreams of a requited love. But all his affairs are played out only in his imagination. In real life, he is timorous and lonely. True enough, I am timid with women. I have grown altogether unused to them. That is, I never did get used to them, for I am all alone. I don't know how to talk to them, even. One day he meets Nastenka on a street corner. He confides his dreams to this pretty and endearing girl, while she tells him of her love for another. And although this St. Petersburg dreamer comes to love his chance friend passionately, the help he extends to her is disinterested and entails self-sacrifice. He goes away so as to leave her free when his fortunate rival appears. Thus, in all his outstanding works, Dostoevsky dealt with the failures of a love bound down by sacrifices and sufferings. He was unable to describe a love triumphant, joyous, shining with masculine faith. In White Nights, the author was obviously retelling his own experiences. He became confused and timid where women were concerned. I don't know whether Madame Belinskaya has given birth to a boy or a girl, he wrote Michael. I heard a baby bawling 2 rooms away, but it was somehow embarrassing and odd to ask. He could dream for hours on end about love and fear incognitus, nestling their heads against his bosom, but when he had to meet living women, he became awkward and ridiculous, and his attempts at intimacy invariably ended in catastrophe. The success of Poor Folk opened the doors of St. Petersburg salons to him, and at the home of Ivan Paniev, he was introduced to the writer's wife, Avdotia Eudoxia. Yesterday I was at the Paniev house. Yesterday I was at the Paniev home for the first time, he wrote Michael on November 16th, 1845, and I think I fell in love with his wife. She is clever and a pretty little thing, and to boot amiable and impossibly straightforward. I am having a gay time. Avdotia was 22, a small, coquettish brunette with flawless features set in a lively face. She seemed to be all a sparkle, the gleam of her teeth, the glitter of her brown eyes, the sheen of her fair skin, the flashing of the large diamonds in her necklace and earrings, all blended into some sort of dazzling radiance. Her dark, lace-trimmed dress emphasized her lithe grace. Thus did Dostoevsky see her, and she vanquished him at first sight. But she was always surrounded by people, and in the throng of her admirers, Nekrasov was the least secretive about his feelings. Within 2 years, she became his mistress. Dostoevsky himself told Michael of his infatuation in a letter dated February 1st, 1846, less than 3 months after he had first met Avdotia. I was quite seriously in love with Paneva. I'm getting over it now, but I'm still uncertain. My health is frightfully upset. My nerves are affected, and I am afraid of a brain fever or a nervous attack. This first infatuation was both agonizing and humiliating. It became clear to him from the very beginning that he could not hope for love in return, and that his passion could not possibly bear any sort of fruit. And to the failure of his love, there was added a social debacle as well. The interest the Society of St. Petersburg had taken in him rapidly declined, and besides, he was behaving in the most preposterous and foolish manner. From the first glance at Dostoevsky, Paneva tells us in her recollections, it was evident that he was a frightfully nervous and impressionable young man. He was rather thin, rather small, with hair like flax, his face of an unwholesome color. His small gray eyes kept shifting somehow uneasily from object to object, while his lips twitched nervously. Because of his youth and nervousness, he had no self-possession, and betrayed too clearly his artistic vanity and his high opinion of his talent as a writer. Being an impressionable individual stunned by his unexpected and brilliant first step in the literary arena and swamped by the praise of competent critics, he could not conceal his pride before other young litterateurs. When these appeared in our circle, one had to be wary about falling prey to their keen wit. Yet Dostoevsky, as if on purpose, left himself wide open through his irascibility and a haughty attitude of being incomparably superior to them because of his talent. And so they went to work on him, needling him in their talk to irritate his self-pride. Turgenev, in particular, was a master at this sort of thing. He deliberately drew Dostoevsky into controversy and brought him to the highest pitch of exasperation. Dostoevsky went to extravagant lengths, vehemently defending absurd opinions which he had let slip in the heat of the debate. But Turgenev seized upon them and made sport of him. Dostoevsky revealed a frightful suspiciousness. He eventually suspected everybody of envying him his talent, and found an intent to minimize a work of his, to affront him in almost every word which was uttered, however innocent. He used to come to us already seething with rancor, pick out a few words, and then pour all the bile that was suffocating him upon those who envied him. Instead of looking on him tolerantly as an ailing, nervous man, they nettled him still further by their sneers. His irritation was intensified because this took place in the presence of the woman he loved, but who showed nothing but a humiliating condescension towards him. Dostoevsky was living through his love for Paneva all the more excruciatingly since she was probably the only woman who had aroused him to such an extent. In his extensive correspondence during the 1840s, there are no references to his being in love except with Paneva. Also, the reminiscences of his contemporaries do not mention a single woman's name in connection with Dostoevsky at this period. However, it would not do to make the erroneous deduction that Dostoevsky, at the age of 25, was virginal, as some of his biographers seem to think. Reisenkamp, who shared his quarters, tells us that in 1842, women did not interest Dostoevsky, that he apparently felt antipathy for them, while Dostoevsky's daughter maintains that his emotions had not yet been awakened. It is difficult to believe these assertions. Reisenkamp himself adds that it is possible he was concealing something in regard to this, and then recalls Dostoevsky's great curiosity concerning the love affairs of his companions. And he continues, it is well known that misogyny frequently conceals not indifference, but an acute sexuality. This sexuality bore probably a dual character, and it is here that we must look for an explanation of Dostoevsky's peculiarities of behavior and his emotional contradictions. Like most epileptics, he evidently had heightened sexual excitability, and at the same time, with an idealistic visionary, that illumination of the flesh mentioned by some of his biographers came to him not in the guise of the enraptured first love of youth, but took the form of shameful encounters with prostitutes and other women of easy virtue. It is very difficult to judge to what extent these hired embraces led him to experience the somber premonition of feminine charms and elemental passion, but it is clear that young Dostoevsky began to differentiate between love and physical pleasure. They had come to him as two unconnected aspects of some elusive unity, and although he understood that the highest attainment lay in some sort of fusion, he could not seem to achieve it. For the dreamer of white nights, Paneva remained in the sphere where lofty passion reigned without physical possession, while the women he found in the slums on the outskirts of St. Petersburg offered him the stark satisfaction of sexual desire. The same letter in which he told Michael of his hopeless love for Paneva contains an addendum. I am so depraved that I cannot live normally. I am afraid of typhus or fever, and my nerves are deranged. Thus did the double image of Eros Asmodeus haunt Dostoevsky's youth. This is all the more comprehensible if we recall the theme of duality in his creative work of this period. In The Double, his second novel published in 1846, the hero Goliadkin has tendencies toward paranoia and erotic fantasies. Of course, through his creativity, Dostoevsky freed himself from many of his own complexes and contradictions. But the catharsis could not exhaust completely the agitations of his flesh and imagination. In the society in which he moved at this time, and according to his own admission, he took part in the sprees of his comrades. The noisy evenings usually wound up in brothels, and it is hard to believe that Second Lieutenant Dostoevsky did not go along. It is also hard to believe that during all the evenings he spent in taverns, he escaped contact with prostitutes and meretricious love of every sort. He must have had a very good knowledge of it. To judge by all the descriptions of the dregs of humanity that are scattered throughout his works, both of the early period and the late, it is enough to read The Landlady, Natachka Nezvanova, and The Double to become convinced of the diversity of the author's personal erotic experiences. The Humiliated and Wrong, which came later, provides further confirmation. Besides everything else, he was, by temperament, an individual of great passions and excessive sensuality. At the sunset of his life, he told Apachinin what a great sway sex exercised over man, and mentioned the subordination of the will to sexual impulse, and also commented that the mental stimulation of desire of the flesh is worse than the sin itself. Evidently, he had known in his youth both this mental stimulation, this play of the erotic imagination, and the direct gratification of the sexual urge, to which he subsequently referred as sin. There is proof after proof on this point. The little Minnas, Claras, Marianne et al. Have grown unbelievably pretty, but they come fearfully high. The other day, Turgenev and Belinsky hauled me over the coals for my disorderly life, he wrote Michael in November 1845. Even if we consider as a joke this roll call so typical of St. Petersburg's professional women of the time, Germans or natives of the Baltic provinces for the most part, it is not without a grain of truth. This is confirmed by the other passages from his correspondence. I am incapable of leading a decent life. That's how worthless I am. He wrote in 1846, and in 1849, after his arrest, he wrote from the prison fortress, "Cell life has by now rather killed my carnal demands. Not altogether pure. I've taken little care of myself hitherto." There is no need to doubt the tempestuous character of these demands. My nature cannot help but break out in extreme cases, and break out precisely in excesses, hyperbolically. He could not bear, as he wrote in February 1844, Pharisees and scribes who preached smugness and condemned a strong, ardent soul unable to endure their vulgar daily timetable and their worldly calendar, and he bestowed unprintable names on his imaginary adversaries. The sea, good for nothings, he at any rate did not hold to established rules of morality and polite behavior. Those who knew Dostoevsky well speak of his lust, of the dark and secret recesses of his sexual personality. His erotic life was constantly complicated by ill health, self-consciousness, and melancholy. It is possible that the attacks of his disease, nervous seizures or epilepsy, if we are to consider the latter as having begun in 1839, made him hypersensitive and vacillating. He did not believe in the possibility of being successful with women, and drove all thoughts of marriage from him. What was the use of that for a poor and sick man like himself? Or else, like Prince Mishkin, the hero of The Idiot, he was afraid of impotence because of the state of his nerves. Potency in individuals of his physical condition is always extremely variable and is not subject to conscious control of willpower, and the sequence of events in his life could not possibly have strengthened his self-confidence. 31 pages in, and we still have not met Maria, his first love. I assume by the end of 85 pages we will get to her. Just don't know when. All right, that's all.